Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom, take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. By Tandem Diabetes Care, makers of the T-Slim X2 insulin pump. And by Real Good Foods, real food you feel good about eating.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, I'm talking to renowned researcher, longtime endocrinologist, and all-around good guy, Dr. Bruce Buckingham. He told me he decided to become an endo after experiencing diabetes camp early in his residency more than 50 years ago.
When I started out, it was urine testing and beef pork insulin, MPH, and regular. So there's just been progressive changes. I put my first kid on a pump in 1979.
Yes, he said 1979. We talk about that. And Dr. Buckingham was principal investigator of the Medtronic 670G at Stanford. So I got his reaction to that recent study that showed some people are struggling with this first commercially available hybrid closed loop. And we talk a lot of other research as well. Plus, an important, and if I'm being honest, a bit of an awkward conversation about race. Comedian and advocate Chelcie Rice and I talk about how to get more people of color at diabetes events. He's great. I'm the awkward one. And our Tell Me Something Good this week, Beyond Type 1 makes the Webby Awards, and a couple of T1D kiddos make an important speech. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I'm your host, Stacey Sims. So glad to have you along. We aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connection, by interviewing the movers and shakers in our community, people like you're going to hear from today, as well as athletes and artists and celebrities living with type 1. I also like to talk to the technology companies and individuals that are making a big difference. My son was diagnosed with type 1 just before he turned 2. That was back in 2006. He is now 14 and finishing up 8th grade here. Holy cow, we're just in the home stretch of the school year. It's crazy. Some time to go still. I mean, that'll be late May for my daughter and early June for Benny. So my goodness. And then my daughter graduates from high school. I am not thinking about that right now. I should also tell you that my husband lives with type 2. I don't have any kind of diabetes, but I have a background in broadcasting and local radio and television, and that is how you get a podcast. You know, when you sit down with someone like Dr. Bruce Buckingham, who has so many years of research really at his fingertips and has made such a huge difference in our community, I'll link up a little bit of a bio of him, and you can just see really how he's made such a big difference in terms of, as I said in that introduction there, testing insulin pumps in 1979. My goodness. It's a little bit intimidating, and he's the nicest guy, but even still, just to be able to talk to him. I'll give you a funny example. We were at the Diabetes Mind Conference last fall, right around late October, early November, and I talked to Bruce for a while. Now, I had talked to a lot of people that day, and I wasn't expecting to talk to Dr. Buckingham, so I hadn't done a bunch of research. And when we sat down and we chatted for a minute, I realized, I think I told this story last fall on the show. I realized I hadn't even scratched the surface because he said to me, hey, what does your son use, by the way? What kind of technology? And I said, oh, he just started basal IQ with Tandem and the X2, and it's amazing, and I love it so much. And he's like, yeah, I was the lead researcher on that. And it was just so funny. You know, I actually gave him a big hug because I love it so much and we were really excited about it. But I said to him, you know, I've got to talk to you again sometime down the road about these devices and about the technology. And so we got the chance to do it this time around. And Chelcie, who you'll hear from later in our community connection, has been on the show before, but as you're listening to the show, he has just spoken at Healthy Voices, which is an annual conference of advocates in all different types of health conditions and different types of mediums. It's not just for podcasting or bloggers or vloggers. It's a really great conference I've been to before. So Chelcie was selected to speak there. So I really look forward to following him on social media, hearing more of what he has to say. And you'll hear us talking about conferences and events like that and social media and getting to hear more voices of people of color. And I think that was a really important interview, but Chelcie's a comedian, so of course he makes it entertaining and puts everybody at ease. All right, those coming up in just a moment, but first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And you know, when Benny was very little and he was in the bathtub or even at the pool. But I remember this mostly in the bathtub because, it was every night, dinner, bath, story, bed. I always noticed his fingertips. I mean, we started poking this kid's fingertips before he turned 2. And we tested a lot. And you know where I'm going with this, right? They looked like little pinprick holes. The fingers just looked, when they got wet and pruny, it's like these like Frankenstein-y fingers. And now he's 14, so, I don't see his hands close up. But the other day, he was washing his hands, and I noticed that his fingertips look normal. They don't have those pokes and those holes and that weird look anymore. We have been using Dexcom for more than 5 years, and with every new iteration, we have done fewer and fewer finger sticks. The latest generation, the Dexcom G6, eliminates finger sticks for calibration and diabetes treatment decisions. Just thinking about how we would do sometimes 10 finger sticks a day in the past makes me so glad that Dexcom has helped us come so far. It really is an incredible tool. If your glucose alerts and readings from the G6 do not match symptoms or expectations, use a blood glucose meter to make diabetes treatment decisions. Learn more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. If I were to read this week's guest's bio, it might take me longer to list his accomplishments and what he's involved with than to actually do the interview. Dr. Bruce Buckingham has a major interest, it says here on his official bio, in type 1 diabetes, continuous glucose sensors, and the development of an artificial pancreas. He is a professor of pediatric endocrinology at Stanford. And if you can think of a pump, CGM, or any combo thereof, he has studied it. He's also, as you'll hear at the end of our interview, a big fan of the DIY tech movement, the Night Scout folks and the We Are Not Waiting. Now, I have to say before we jump in, this interview came about a bit serendipitously. I had hoped to talk to Dr. Buckingham after we spoke briefly last fall, and I realized exactly who he was. So when I saw him at the recent Friends for Life conference in Seattle, I told him, oh my gosh, I can't wait to talk to you again. I'd really like to redo our interview. Can we sit down sometime? And he said, how about now? And I said, oh my gosh, okay. So just a bit of inside baseball. Conferences are terrible places to do interviews because the noise is terrible. When I did these interviews in the fall, I had brought all this equipment with me. I was ready. I had set up. I had noise blocking barriers. For this one, I had my phone and a lav mic. But hey, he was ready to go. So we grabbed a hotel room. We actually were able to use one of the suites. It was quite swanky and fancy. And we actually, both of us, oh my gosh, we both ran around taking pictures because this suite was on the top floor. It had an amazing view of Seattle. I'll post the picture in the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group. But this is one of those gigantic hotel suites. It had like 4 rooms and a dining room. But the point of all this, is the audio is a bit echoey. It's not the best quality like I try usually to bring you. It's fine. You can hear everything. And what Dr. Buckingham has to say, I think, is truly very important. So you'll get past the audio issues. So here's my interview with researcher and Dr. Bruce Buckingham. There was a lot of talk recently about automated insulin closing loops, and there are many different manufacturers coming out. So let's just start talking, if we could, about an overview. And take me back, if you could. When did you start really looking at the closed loop systems? Obviously, it's well before they come out.
Yeah. Well, we were working on CGM a lot. We were really excited, and with the DirectNet study group, which is an NIH-funded study group, the goal was to look at continuous glucose monitoring. And once we began to find the sensors were getting better, and I think the key is the sensors getting better and accurate enough that you could really depend on them to dose insulin, and that you're going to have a fair amount of reliability in the sensors. And it's been calculated you need roughly a percent error of 10% or less to really feel comfortable giving the insulin. And you got to have not a lot of sensor dropouts and a consistent reading to deliver the insulin. So as the sensors improve, then the automated insulin delivery could improve. And there were a number of groups working on it, and initially there was one company that was focused on doing this, and Al Mann at MiniMed. The reason one of his major goals and really focuses was on developing automated insulin delivery and artificial pancreas. And his very early on brought in a guy named John Mastrotoro, who developed their continuous glucose sensor system. And he had an implanted pump and an implanted sensor into the right atrium. And it turns out to keep that sensor in the bloodstream, it needed a lot of coatings, and it introduced some time delays. And it just didn't, the time delays, he had great insulin delivery because it was given intraperitoneally. So the insulin acted very quickly. But the sensor delays were such that you couldn't really use it in a true close-loop situation. So there's still people using that intraperitoneal insulin pump, mostly in France, in Europe, a few in the United States that fly there to get their insulin refilled.
I'm going to stop you right there, and I apologize for my ignorance. Intraperitoneal, what does that mean?
Intraperitoneal means the pump. It was sort of like a titanium hockey puck that was put under the skin in the abdomen, and it has a catheter going into the peritoneum, which is where your intestines are, and is the not into an intestine, obviously, but into the space there. And then when the insulin's delivered, it gets picked up. A good percentage of it, 50% or so, goes directly into the liver. And so instead of going with a sub-Q shot into your systemic circulation and then reaching the liver a few circulations around, this goes straight to the liver, which is where one of the main actions of insulin is. And if you look at the pancreas, when it secretes insulin, it goes directly to the liver first. So it's a little more physiologic insulin delivery, and it's a really faster on, faster off insulin delivery. So that was his initial vision. And they developed the MiniMed pump, a sub-Q pump, and then they developed sub-Q sensors. And then their goal was to link the two for automated insulin delivery. And the first real systems were just, if someone's low, they just shouldn't continue to get insulin. It just makes no sense to, if you're hypoglycemic, to continue pumping insulin into you. So they had this system where it was a threshold suspend, and we worked on that system with some academic groups, an engineer from Stanford and from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, Wayne Paquette and Faye Cameron, and developed a threshold suspend. And we also worked with the group at UC Santa Barbara, Yao DeSalle and Frank Doyle in developing these algorithms. And we tried multiple different ones and tried to figure out the one that worked best. And it turned out to be pretty simple. You predict about 30 minutes into the future, if you're going to be less than 80, you shut off the insulin delivery. And initially it would be for a fixed period of time. And then we found out that if you just get the first blood sugars going back up and you turn it back on, it would work pretty well. And if you got low again, it would just turn on and turn off. So Medtronic was working on their own threshold suspend system, and theirs was a fixed 2-hour shutoff. But this just, in our mind, seemed like a no-brainer. If you're low, you shouldn't keep getting insulin. And it was the hardest thing because it was the first automated insulin delivery to get through the FDA. So it took like 3-4 years to get this through. And Medtronic came out with the 530 pump, which was a threshold suspend pump. And that's just if you hit 70, you would shut off. And then the next was to predict you were going to get low and shut off before you got low. And that was the predictive low glucose suspend systems. And Medtronic has one, which is the 640G pump in Europe, and it never really came to the U.S. And we had an algorithm we continue to work with through some NIH grants with Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and the JABE Center. And that sort of same system is what's in the Tandem basal IQ. Just if you're predicted to get low, you're going to shut off, and once your blood sugar is coming up, you'll turn the pump back on. One of the times that's really hard to regulate is the nighttime when you want to sleep. During the day, if you really want to manage your diabetes, you can pretty well do that if you pay a lot of attention to it. But at night, if you want to sleep, and parents were not getting a lot of sleep, worrying about their kids at night. And it's much easier for an algorithm to deal with sort of basal conditions where there are little fluctuations in the glucose values and control them overnight, as compared during the day when you eat a meal and there's a very rapid change and a very high rate of change of the glucose. And with exercise, you may drop things quickly. So the day has much more fluctuation and is harder to control. So the first systems were really aimed at nighttime control. And again, a number of groups, academic groups and industry, were working on those. And when we talked about the predicted suspend, the FDA said, why just focus at night? You can just do that 24 hours a day. So the systems really came out working 24 hours a day.
That's interesting. That was a suggestion from the FDA?
Yeah. Well, people were going to go stepwise. They'd work at nighttime and then do the daytime. And they said,
why not?
Why not? Go 24 hours. And the same thing with the automated insulin, the 670G. If you're going to tend to regulate glucose levels and bring them into a range, why not only at night, but do it during the day? So that's how the systems have all been going now.
Right back in just a moment, but first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneTouch. Handwriting your blood glucose levels is the ultimate throwback. The OneTouch VarioFlex meter seamlessly syncs with the free OneTouch Reveal mobile app to create your dynamic electronic logbook. And when you choose the OneTouch Reveal mobile app, you'll be joining thousands of other people living with diabetes. In fact, as of this past October, OneTouch Reveal was the #1 downloaded diabetes management app in the US, Canada, France, and the UK. To upgrade today to the OneTouch VarioFlex meter and OneTouch Reveal mobile app, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneTouch logo. Now back to my interview with Dr. Bruce Buckingham. I remember in 2010, I heard Jeff Hitchcock, who here at Friends for Life, speak, and he said something that seemed so fanciful at the time. He said, imagine a system where it'll keep your blood sugar level for 10 hours, but the trick is you can't move and you can't eat, and you can't exercise. And we all said, well, that doesn't make any sense. And he said, you're sleeping. Yeah. And we all went, oh, how great would that be, right? It just seems so far-fetched, and now here we are. So when all these different companies are moving toward closed loops, I know there's a lot of proprietary information and there are different algorithms. They're all moving towards basically the same thing. Are there major differences between how these systems work in terms of, well, one will increase the one will increase the basal, or one will give you a bolus, or, as consumers, are there things we might look for in these different companies?
They all essentially have some model they're working on, and they predict if you get insulin, how long it's going to last and what its effect is going to be. Some of them have sort of food models built into them. If you eat so many carbs, you can have so much carbs on board. All of them at the moment have a basal rate modifier to them. So they're modifying the amount of basal insulin that's being given. And that's predominantly where the Medtronic system is today. But they're currently doing studies where it will give correction doses automatically. So instead of doing a finger stick to get a glucose in, to get a correction dose, it will look at the glucose sensor value and give correction doses based on what the sensor is reading. The Tandem Control IQ system, when it comes out, is a basal rate modulator, but every hour it will also look at the glucose value and give a correction dose if someone's running high. Insulet, again, is a model predictive control algorithm and does give some corrections based upon if the glucose is running high to bring things down. And everyone will always do better if they can actually look at how much they're going to eat, get the insulin in ahead of time before they start eating, and let the controller help modulate the insulin delivery after that. So we found that we can give sort of super boluses, give a lot more insulin up front than you might otherwise, because on the back end, the controller will shut off insulin delivery to prevent a low. So one of the issues is always the match between insulin coming on board to meet a meal's demands and then the tail of the insulin at the end where you may have too much or too little. So
I know a lot of people using basal IQ and being more aggressive with their dosing because it cushions the landing. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. Or with any of the automated insulin delivery systems, you can do that. And the meals make a difference. If you have a very simple carb meal, you get a big spike in any insulin. If you're responding to the glucose spike, you would give a lot. but then you would overshoot because it's simple carbs and it'll be gone shortly. On the other hand, if you have a high-fat meal, sometimes if you give a lot of insulin up front, you'll actually get low because the food is so slowly absorbed. And then you have absorption over 2 to 5 hours if it's, a really fatty meal. And fat also creates insulin resistance, so you actually may need more insulin for that meal. So that's where you would give like a dual wave bolus if you were manually doing it. And the algorithms need to sort of be able to make those adjustments. So right now, you'll always do better if you're assessing the size of your meal and giving your insulin ahead of time, because it takes 20 minutes for insulin to really become effective and working. But the goal is, I think, in the next round, to get the full closed loop. So you aren't having to put all those inputs in that entry. And that's making an algorithm that's more aggressive and maybe adding adjunctive therapy. So
before we move on to a more fully closed loop, let me get your take on the Medtronic study that came out recently. Now, this was a very small study. I believe it was only pediatric patients, where something like 30 to 40% stopped using it. What was your reaction to that? What should we not take away from that study?
First of all, the Medtronic is a first generation. It was the first one out there. It was huge to break the space, and I think it has allowed the industry to really move forward. I think it's helped investment in the space because people really wanted something like this, and so the sales were very good. And so all of that is good, but it was first generation. So they put in a lot of safeguards. You had their sensor at this point in time, unlike the Medtronic, like the Dexcom, is not for non-adjunctive use. So you need to do finger sticks to keep the sensor calibrated. You needed to do a finger stick to give a correction dose. So the sensor had a lot higher maintenance. And again, because it was the first system with the sensor delivering insulin, they built in some internal systems to make internal checks to make sure the sensor was working well. This some impedance spectroscopy, and if that current shifts, then it would ask for someone to do a calibration value. And it turns out that if you put in, and it may not like that initial value, and so it could ask for another one. And if you put in 2-3 calibration values close together, it would then the internal sensor evaluation system would think that sensor was failing because they weren't consistent enough, and it would kill the sensor. So if you initially put a sensor calibration in and it didn't work, the idea is to wait a half hour at least before you put in another one. So there is some work and maintenance in keeping that sensor going, and they have recently modified it. They have a new transmitter with different software in it for evaluating these and asking less of the patient to keep the system running. And I think it was a lot of it was the maintenance of the sensor. And part in that article, a lot of the kids were adolescents that did it, stopped using it. And if you miss a meal bolus or are late in bolusing, your blood sugar will run high. And again, because it was first generation, there are a lot of safeguards built into this. So if you're running high for 3 hours or an hour over 300 or 3 hours over 250, it gets concerned that there might be an infusion set failure.
Oh.
Because if you're running high and the system is giving insulin and it's not bringing you down, it thinks, well, your set may have failed. So it asks you to get a blood glucose and make sure that your sensor is real and to inspect the site and make sure.
You could just be a teenager who ate a hamburger and forgot the bolus.
Most commonly, it was someone who was had significantly under-bolused or forgot to bolus. And then they got kicked out of closed loop. Yeah. And then it would take a while to get back into closed loop. And because of some of these issues, if you're really on top of the system and giving all your boluses ahead of time and keep yourself in closed loop, it works very well. And it's sort of a virtuous circle. If you are keeping things in shape, then it's going to stay in auto mode, and it's going to be able to get rid of some of the highs and some of the lows and smooth things out, and control looks pretty good. And you're going to bed with a pretty decent glucose and waking up with a good glucose. So, but if you forget to bolus, then you're kicked out of closed loop, and then it's work to get back in, and it's a struggle. And I think the sensor maintenance was an issue. So there were a number of people that had G6s now that had come out where there's no finger sticks. And so the comparison of maintenance was significantly different. And if they had been on a G6 and they switched over to this, then they could get frustrated.
Let me interrupt myself here talking about closed-loop systems and take it back even further if we could. Many people who are listening are very familiar with your work, have worked with you. We're very fortunate to have an incredible listenership that's really bright, really up-to-date in technology. But I know there are a lot of people who may be hearing you for the first time. Do you mind telling me, why did you get into this field? What's your story? Way back, I mean, you've worked with so many people and done so much research. How'd you get started? Did you choose this field? Did it choose you? Did you stumble down the hall during residency?
Yeah. It's always a combination of just, when I was an intern, I did a diabetes camp. And there's one thing seeing kids in clinic and one thing living with them and being in a camp and really seeing them and the struggles they go through. And so I became interested in diabetes. And when I started out, it was urine testing and beef pork insulin, MPH, and regular. So there's just been progressive changes. I put my first kid on a pump in 1979. So I was really interested in that concept of being able to better manage and get boluses in easier and the basal rate control overnight. And then we got the finger sticks, which was great, much better than the urine. But being able to get 288 readings a day and see, before continuous glucose monitoring, people didn't know what happened to them overnight. They didn't know what happened in the hours before and after a meal. In the 1 or 2 hours when blood sugars, you often see, particularly in the morning, go up, and they could have a really good value before breakfast and before lunch, but in between, it can be fairly high. So there were loads that they weren't aware of. So there was just a lot more information you could get with the continuous glucose monitoring. So that I became very interested in that. And it worked with most of the companies doing continuous glucose monitoring for years. And then it was just a natural thing to take that information and hook it to a pump and begin to try and automate things.
How big was that pump in 1979?
It was a big rubric.
Yeah.
It was pounds.
It's like almost like a shoebox size?
No, it wasn't quite a shoebox, but it was probably 10 inches tall, about 3-4 inches wide, and it was like a steel case. It was significant. And if you wanted to, you would turn dials up to give a bolus for a while, and then you'd turn them back down. So it was, as with a lot of things, not for the faint of heart.
Yes, we're thankful to those early pioneers who helped wear it and tested it. You mentioned during a talk this morning something that I wanted to bring up and kind of get confirmation of. We were hearing a lecture that included information about complications. And among pediatrics, it seems like they are way down, if not non-existent. Can you give a nervous parent the reassuring information that you shared this morning? Yeah,
I think probably with the advent of blood testing and also better insulins and now with continuous glucose monitoring and pumps, it's so much easier to get control. So when I started out and it was urine testing and these older insulins, we would see kids in 17, 18 years of age with background retinopathy in their eye. They weren't losing vision, but they had the early changes that were beginning to happen. And I remember there was one kid who was like 17 years old in renal failure and going on dialysis already. So things could happen if someone wasn't taking care of themselves. You didn't have an A1C to really have that measure. When I was in my fellowship, I was using this assay as a boronate affinity column to measure like hot slated hemoglobin, and I took it to my professor and said I wanted to publish this. And he said, but you have no measure of what control is like. And he's true. I mean, we just had the urine test. So
wow.
It didn't get published. But that's the A1C. And it has made a huge change as a marker. You know, people come in and they say, what's my grade? And things like that. It's some judgment to it, but it at least gave people a mark for how they could prevent the complications and get in a range where it wasn't going to be as bad. And again, that wasn't out when I started out.
And you don't see those complications or those beginnings anymore?
No. If I see a young adult or an older adult who may be in the study and they have one microaneurysm, I bring everyone in to see it because they just haven't seen it. Yeah.
That's remarkable. So those of us who are very lucky to have the CGM, to have the pump, to have insurance coverage, I mean, there's a lot of complications that go on here just in terms of getting these things. But for those of us who are looking at these closed-loop systems that are coming as viable options, I'm not going to ask you to tell me what's better. We don't even know. They're not out yet. But you're studying so many of these different systems. What can you tell us about the burden? Is it really being lifted on a lot of people? Because I've got to say, and Tandem and Dexcom are sponsors of the podcast, but I do feel like my son is doing less work for better results these days, which is pretty humongous to say about a person with type 1. Are you seeing that across the board as you study, or do you feel like the numbers are good, but the burden is still quite large?
So I think the burden of diabetes is one of sort of it's control, but it's also the burden and the work of diabetes that we've been trying to work for with automated insulin delivery. And again, during the day, today, it's hybrid. So you still need the bolus to really make the system work well. But I think the systems, because they're continually looking at where your glucose is going, and they can begin to adjust the insulin. If you're tending to go high, they can shut it down. If you're beginning to go low, it gives you better levels of control, and you have a lower risk of hypoglycemia. And I think of severe hypoglycemia, which has been a huge burden in the past. And some people have kept their glucoses running a little bit high because they didn't want to run that risk of getting low. And overnight, when they were sleeping, they may have kept them higher. Now they can really, I think currently the systems all do a good job at the nighttime, and we've really made a huge benefit to people. So the nighttime burden is less. It's less for the parents. It's less for the kids. The daytime is the next area, and there's a lot of work going on there. I think as you get automated correction doses going on, which is with the Control IQ with Tandem and with the next generation of the Medtronic system, they will be doing that. When the Insulet system comes out, it will be doing that. And it's going to make a difference if you want. I think to get to full closed loop, where you aren't counting carbs, you aren't having any food entry in there, you need probably some automated way. Perhaps we're using a little watch on the hand to detect eating, that the clue, and we'll see if that can work to get the insulin in a little bit ahead of time and right at the onset of eating. And then there's some interesting work with using a drug equivalent of amylin. So when your islet secretes insulin, every time it also secretes this hormone amylin, which delays gastric emptying, lowers glucagon levels, and gives you a sense of satiety. Yeah. And so this pramlintide was used in a closed-loop system and really gave very flat postprandial glucose values. And it would be nice to see how that could work in a full closed-loop system where you don't give any meal announcement.
Was the amylin, did they have any results in terms of people eating less or gaining less weight?
It was a short-term study. Okay. But in general, that's true.
Yeah, with that's fascinating.
But one of the side effects has been the GI side effects with having it. And there may be ways in delivering the dose to limit those side effects by, like sort of thinking of dual wave boluses in the group. And by Hadar did that, where they would give so much up front and then so much extended. And I think that could help control that side effect. And the bionic pancreas now is the one system that you don't count carbs, you just say small, medium, large meal. And so the numeracy has gone way down. And with that system, there is no correction doses because it's all given by the controller. And it will, with glucagon, get very good glucose control because then you can be a little more aggressive up front with the meal and give more insulin. And if it's a little too much, you have the glucagon on the back end to keep you from getting low. So, and that's sort of physiologic. What happens if you don't have diabetes, if you eat a meal, you have the insulin going up front when the glucose is going up. And then if your glucose is going down and getting at risk for hypo, you're giving glucagon. Your pancreas is giving glucagon. So it is somewhat of a physiologic replacement to have a system giving both insulin and glucagon. So I think there's a lot, and these things should move forward, and I think people are really working to get to the full closed loop, and it may not be perfect, but it's going to really decrease the burden and really achieve glycemic control that will prevent almost all complications. So,
you mentioned that you decided to go into endocrinology during your residency, going to camp. Do you still go to diabetes camps? Do you visit them?
Oh, yeah.
You did that all throughout? Is that fun?
Yeah.
Is it still fun?
Yeah. A lot of our closing studies initially started out at camp. The overnight studies we did at camps. The studies for the control IQ algorithm, we did a lot of testing of those with the UVA group at diabetes camps. The predictive low glucose suspend from Medtronic we tested at a camp. The first 670G pump, the first one tested was at a diabetes camp, and we will continue to be doing studies this summer at a diabetes camp.
I have some camps you should come to. I'm going to give you no, I'm just kidding.
I've really enjoyed camp. I always come back from camp invigorated by just being with the kids, and they're just great kids.
I have to ask before I let you go, because as I've said several times, and my listeners know, we use one of the algorithms that you have studied. And your input has, been invaluable. These things do not get to market without testing and input and revisions. And what's it like to be parents like me who just want to hug you and say thank you for all the good work that you've done? You've made such a huge impact.
Yeah, but if there weren't parents and kids who have volunteered to try these systems, when they were often very clunky and put together, it's someone's sensor, someone else's pump, an algorithm on a tablet, or we thought it was really slick when we could get it down to a cell phone. But people have gone through a lot and have tolerated a lot to bring this forward. And I think it's the whole community that has had this vision and has really worked toward it. So I'm one facilitator in the big community, in the JDRF group, in the NIH, and the Helmsley Foundation, all the people that have committed the resources and funding to do this, the industry that has continued to push for making these products available. And a lot of these, if you look at the people working in this space, have someone in their family or themselves with type 1. I mean, you look at Tidepool, the bionic pancreas group with Ed Damiano. The Medtronic has a number of people that have diabetes at Dexcom. So it's a community that sees this vision and is making it happen. So.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of the conference. I know it's a busy time for you to spend so much time. This has been a privilege. I just want to mention the do-it-yourselfers. And the loopers. We cannot forget them because they have made such a huge difference. And I think they have also pushed the innovation and been able to work fast on algorithms and make things available to people sooner. Again, you have to do a little patchwork to make everything work, but they get it working. And have made their lives better and are, again, moving the whole space forward. So kudos to them, too. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
I love how at the end I'm trying to give him credit and thank him, and he keeps thanking other people and pushing it off to other people. I mean, that's just the kind of guy that he is. He is so genuinely interested and excited in all of his work. I'll give you a quick example. I started telling him about Benny and how we use the Tandem X2 with Basal IQ, but we also use Tresiba. If you are not a longtime listener, you may not realize, but I talked about this before. My son takes 1 shot of long-acting insulin a day. That's about half the basal. 40 to 45% of his basal comes from the shot, and the rest of his basal and all of his boluses come from the pump. And it's working out beautifully for us. In fact, I'm going to talk about this in a couple of weeks when we check in with our endo, because I think we're going to get some pretty amazing results I want to share with you. But he wanted to hear all about that. And I showed him how the time in range has really improved by showing him the Dexcom app. And he was taking pictures of the app. I guess there had been an update that morning on the Follow app. So he was really, it was Clarity. There had been an update that morning on the Clarity app, so it looked a little different. So he was taking pictures of my phone and sending it to people. It was amazing to see this man who has done so much good over so many years be so excited still about the research. Man, we are lucky to have him. We are also lucky to have our Community Connection guest this week, Chelcie Rice. Community Connection is brought to you by Tandem Diabetes Care, makers of the T-Slim X2 insulin pump. Chelcie Rice goes by a diabetic comic on a lot of his social media handles, and that's exactly what he is. We've had him on the show before. I think he and I had a really interesting conversation about comic books on the show as well at one point. But I wanted to talk to Chelcie because there's a lot of conversation right now about representation at conferences and panels and on social media. And, these are hard things to talk about only because I don't know about you. I mean, you know who I am, right? I am a white, Jewish, suburban mom. I drive a minivan. These are not conversations that I am used to having. But when I go to conferences, I know that when I meet a mom like me, it helps me connect, right? It helps me feel okay about certain things. It helps me learn certain things. So imagine going to a conference or being on social media and not seeing anybody who looks like you. And I know that there are many more people talking about representation in many better ways than I can. But I thought, look, even if I mess this up, it is worth it to have the conversation. So what you're about to hear is a great talk. Chelsea's terrific. I mean, I listen back like I always do. I think I sound very awkward. But if we don't take a chance, roll the dice, and have these awkward conversations, nothing is going to change. I did this interview with Chelcie last fall at the Diabetes Mind Conference. We were both winners of the Patient Voices contest. And we talk about that, how we both kind of felt like fish out of water with those amazing technical minds. But here is my conversation with Chelcie. So you're here as a patient advocate like me.
Yep.
We're not the deep dive data people.
Yeah, I just noticed that from the last session that all the sessions we've had today is just like, it's just proven that, I really didn't pay attention at all when I was in high school. And I probably should have, I don't know. It was just like, just completely over my head. And I was like checking my badge to see if I'm in the right room or what. I don't know, man, because this is beyond what I'm accustomed to. As far as technical as I get, it's like, Xbox One, 360, Nintendo. That's about it.
I was going to ask you what you thought of the conference so far. Obviously, there's a lot of technical knowledge in these rooms. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there are a lot of really interesting concepts like, closed loop and, open source. And anything resonate with you that you've seen here?
Well, I mean, mostly what I've gotten out of most of the stuff that I've seen is it amazes me how many people are out there fighting for people with diabetes that are actually trying to come up with new devices, new ways to make the existing devices work better. And many of them were motivated by diabetes in itself, whether their children have it or whether they have it themselves. So that alone amazes me, and it makes me, proud to know these people, to be around them, because this is the first time I've been around a lot of people who are actually out there, I guess what I could say, ground roots type of development, and the research and the development that they're doing is just phenomenal. It's really phenomenal.
I know one of the concepts, one of the thoughts, something you're really working hard to get out there is getting more people of color involved and asked to be involved.
Right.
Let's talk about that for a minute if we can, because it can be a very awkward subject, Chelcie, because I don't know if you know, but people get nervous when you start talking about race.
Yeah, no, I totally.
Of course.
I know firsthand. I mean, whether it just be in personal relationships or just people that I've never met before. I mean, something about race in general just puts up this screen around people to where they don't know what to say, and it's not a regional thing. It's not something that, because I'm from the South, and you live in the South, and it's by nature you think it's like, well, that's just the way people are in the South. They because the South has a strange and touchy relationship with the subject of race. But once you get out of that, once you come here to California, or if you go to Wisconsin, or to Texas, or to Washington State, it's the same thing. It's like people, it's not something people want to bother with. I mean, I get it in a sense that once you start talking about it, you're opening up a kind of Pandora's box. And what I see happening a lot, especially in personal relationships specifically, is you become afraid of hurting a friend or misunderstanding a friend. And you see that on social media because when you're typing, you don't really have an understanding of people's reactions, and words can get misconstrued. And so, but when you're face to face, you fear that you're going to just hurt your friend or make your friend angry, and you're going to jeopardize your friendship.
Well, one of the things that I really credit you with doing, and it's no surprise knowing that you are a stand-up comedian, is that you do handle this with humor, which helps a great deal. When we were introducing ourselves yesterday, you made a joke about, this is one of my, we need, I don't want to call it a platform. What would you call it? This is one of my goals.
Yeah.
You said, this is one of my goals, to get more people of color involved and to be asked to be involved. And looking around the room, I can see that it's needed, and everybody went, there was some light laughter.
Yeah, there was, and that was. I did that to try and. Well, I was kind of testing the waters because in a comedy club situation, people are more apt to laugh at a joke like that because it's funny when I do that joke or any joke of that nature, people they'll laugh because now I can laugh because I noticed it too. But in here, it was. I know it was a different situation, but it was amazing how people weren't willing to really kind of just loosen up. And because it was an elephant in the room, plain and simple. I mean, you'd have to be, Stevie Wonder not to notice that, that it was just one or two people of color in the whole room. And so to see people get uptight about that little joke, you have to tag it with, okay, loosen up, folks. It's okay.
Right,
it's a
okay
joke.
To laugh.
And, but yeah, that's usually the way you break the ice with something like that is, you just keep it loose.
Now, again, trying not to worry about offending you, because that's not my intent. How do we deal with this? Is it as simple as people in positions of inviting people to conferences to sit down and really think, well, who do I know? Who do I know who's black? Who do I know who's Latino? Who do I know? Or is there a better way to do outreach to find the people that are out there?
One of the things that I think would... because it seems kind of disingenuous when you just think to yourself, okay, who do I know that's black?
Right. I need a black person, so I'm going to call Chelcie.
Who do I know
that's what I meant when I said I
yeah.
didn't want to sound offensive.
Yeah, no, and that's a legitimate concern because it does seem disingenuous when you say, well, okay, find me 3 black people, find me 4 Asians, because then all of a sudden they don't become people, they're just colors. And so what I think it would do is, one of the things that I've noticed is like when I go to many organizations like Instagram feeds and I just kind of scroll through the feed, and if I can go 5 thumb scrolls without seeing a person of color, then I'm going to it makes me wonder how is it that it doesn't make sense to me because we're supposed to be in this era where people don't see color, but you don't see color. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, we don't judge people based on whether they're black or white. Everyone's welcome, but yet you're not putting forth an effort to make sure how you present yourself is open the door, that the door is open for somebody. Because and the easiest way for me to help people understand that, especially when I'm speaking to a female such as yourself, I'll say, okay, look, let's say you went to that same Instagram feed and you scrolled through it and you didn't see a female. All you saw were men. Would you feel that whatever this organization is doing is geared towards you.
Right.
Here's another example of something. I've been reading a book on becoming an influencer, written by a female writer. She's actually, I guess she's a agent for influencers. She wrote a book on how to become an influencer. Great. I'm listening. I've got it on audiobook, and I'm listening to it. And in the introduction, she says, now you'll notice that most of the people that I speak about in my book are females, but don't worry, everything in this book can apply to everyone. Okay, cool. And so I continue to listen to the book, and it's still nothing but female influencers talking about specifically to females. Do something, but don't be that girl. And I'm like, okay, I get where you said that is.
But you have to work as the listener to put yourself in that situation.
Exactly.
You have to twist it around.
Exactly. And I shouldn't have to do that.
No.
I shouldn't have to do that, especially because you said that it's open
right. If she hadn't
for
said
everyone. And then, I'm just going to put it out there. The name of the book is Influencer, but to me, it would have been better if it was called Influence Her, because that's clearly what it was geared at. Because if a guy is reading this book and he's wanting to become an influencer in, I don't know, muscle cars, if that's his thing, he can't he's going to have to work hard to wrap his head around listening to an example of a woman who's an influencer in makeup or design or whatever, something that he doesn't really. And I'm not saying it has to be a female type thing. Maybe she's maybe she's an influencer in yachting or something, but that's not something geared towards him, and it's a female. Right. So he's going to have to work to kind of work his way around understanding that and trying to work it to where it suits him. So it doesn't make sense when you just alienate people like that. And I'm not saying many of these organizations are initially trying to alienate people, but you're not exactly putting forth the effort to present yourself in a manner that is open to everyone.
I don't think that, for the most part, people are generally aware of it.
Yeah, I mean,
when you point it out, it's, that's so obvious, but we don't think about it.
And I get nervous sometimes, and I'm going to come off like a nut because I openly said, "Hey, how come you don't have any black people in there?" And and a lot of this goes even further outside of race. There seems to be a bit of an ageism thing, because you see some of these fees are nothing but 20-somethings. But there are some people my age and older that are doing some phenomenal things out there that could easily be influencers, that could easily be helping other people. So you build these barriers, but unintentionally. And then when you finally come up noticing that you built the barrier, then it's like, oh my God, how did this happen?
Yeah. After I saw some comments online, and there's a new Instagram account about women of color in diabetes, I went through some of the brochures and speaker lists for a lot of the conferences that I attend.
Right.
And there's very few people of color, if any. What would you advise them to do? Again, not saying that, we're going to find 3 black people and we're going to put them on this panel and that'll take care of the problem.
I think one of the things that I would do, kind of go old school, is trying to reach out to black media, Hispanic media, Asian media.
Is it fair and acceptable to say, look, we looked at our program and we would really like to include more people of color. We feel awkward reaching out, but we'd like to reach out?
I would word it just like that. Just be honest. Just totally be honest, because, when you're honest about it, people can't help but respect you. Yeah. And the way you just said it, it's just as honest as it can be and just as harmless. If you just put forth a little effort to say, let's find some venues or some routes that we can take to kind of reach out to these people. Because as far as the diabetes world is concerned, I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there that could be fantastic advocates if they would just got it in their mind that they could. And that's what I did. When I reached out and met up with a lot of different advocates, I never had, at the beginning, I had no idea that I could do this, that I could, actually have a voice. And I'm still, intimidated sometimes when I get around some of the advocates that are doing some phenomenal things. But that's one of the things I try to do, is make myself visible, to show that it doesn't take a triathlete, it doesn't take a boxer, it doesn't take a pro football quarterback, it doesn't take a National League baseball player. It just takes an individual who's willing to step out and start out by advocating for yourself, and then once you get a feel of it, decide whether you want to try and help somebody else. Because oftentimes you'll see yourself wanting to become an advocate once you see, well, that person's just like me. and they could use, maybe my insight of what I've done. But to get back to, as far as the diversity, it's really going to come down to making a conscious effort to look at your present situation, see how you can actually better broaden your reach. Yeah, it's cool to have, these different, like I created one called Men of Color with Diabetes and the Women of Color. And it's a cool idea that one day we'll never have to do that. I don't see any problem with having those types of groups. But at the same time, reach across the table and see what you have to offer, and then hopefully they'll be receptive to what you have to offer. I don't necessarily mean that, you always have to go and ask someone to the table. Just save a place for somebody else. It has a little bit of a metaphor. It's like you don't have to invite anybody to the table. Just make a place for somebody in case somebody would like to sit down. And if you want to join the table, don't wait to be asked. There's a space right there for you. Just sit down. If they don't have a chair, bring your own and squeeze your way in. That's all you got to do.
That's great. Thank you so much, Chelcie.
Not a problem.
As I said, Chelcie just spoke recently at the Healthy Voices conference, and I will link up more information about him, his social media channels, and some other articles about representation, because I think we do have a long way to go. It's getting better, but we really need to figure out how to get more voices in this community. So if you've got something to say, like he says, don't wait for them to set a place at the table. Just pull on up. Let's roll on up and get out there. I was very fortunate in that when I started talking about this in 2007, when I started my blog, it never occurred to me not to. I've made a living out of having a big mouth. And I was very fortunate that way when I started the podcast almost 4 years ago now. I figured, hey, whoever's going to listen is going to listen. Let's see what we can do. Let's see what kind of good we can do. So everybody's voice in this community matters. If you've got something to say it. Let's go. Come on. I'd love to hear from you about that. Oh, and that brings me, hearing from you means it is time for my favorite segment for Tell Me Something Good. And Tell Me Something Good is brought to you by Real Good Foods. One of the challenging times of day with type 1 can be breakfast, right? Because a lot of kids especially have that morning high. You've got that dawn effect going on. And then you're trying to get them to please eat something before you go to school, whether you have diabetes or not. I always try to get my kids to eat breakfast. Sometimes that's a losing battle. And Real Good Foods has some new breakfast sandwiches that they just came out with. 6 carbs, 18 grams of protein, and they look fantastic. Sausage, egg, and cheddar cheese. Now the buns are cauliflower cheesy bread buns, and they are gluten-free. So if you want to try these, just check them out online. You can go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Real Good Foods logo. You can also get the poppers and the pizzas in stores. We go to our local Harris Teeter to get this. The poppers are now available at Kroger, and a lot of Walmart carry the products. If you're not sure, you can go to their website and find a store. You can read up a whole lot more about them, but we are big fans. In fact, Benny just reminded me he wanted me to get him another Supreme Pizza. So I will be taking care of that. Okay, tell me something good. Last year, we highlighted Previously Healthy, a long-form piece by the folks at Beyond Type 1. This was a very sad story all about a North Carolina girl, a baby, a toddler really, who died from type 1 diabetes because she was not diagnosed. Her health records said previously healthy, and they just, for whatever reason, didn't catch it, and she died from DKA. I'm bringing this up now. Why are you thinking, gosh, why? And tell me something good. Because Previously Healthy has been nominated for a Webby Award for Best Writing. The People's Voice voting is open just another couple of days. And Beyond Type 1 has done an incredible job, as they always do, of getting the word out. So I will link it up. You got some last minute voting in there that you can vote for them. And I think this is good. I mean, what a tragic story. But the good that has come out of it is the education that has come because of this article. And it's a beautiful piece. It's a long format written piece with photographs. There's video that goes along with it. I was so thrilled. Our local CBS affiliate here in Charlotte picked up the story and did a whole segment on it. So out of this horrible story, I know has come some good. So please check that out. Vote for Beyond Type 1. The Webby Awards are national, international. They are amazing and big. So if Beyond Type 1 could win this, it would really mean a lot more awareness. Our other Tell Me Something Good stories come from the Facebook group. group. And Colette wrote that my son, who is 18 years old now, but was diagnosed at age 10, received his new pump. She says it was a Tandem t:slim X2 and CGM, Dexcom G6, about 45 days ago. His A1C has dropped by 3 points. Wow. These past 8 years, he was primarily giving himself shots. Control became a real issue when he became a teen. We are beyond thrilled with these results, and it makes the high cost hurt less. Oh, Colette, I'm sorry that your insurance isn't helping you out there, that these things do cost so much even with insurance, but I'm so glad. That's an amazing A1C result. So way to go. She doesn't put her son's name here, but that's fantastic. Congrats all around. And Shelley wrote, my 2 T1 kids 1 week ago both read their speeches to a sold out crowd for their diabetes camp auction. Her kids are 7 and 11. And the speeches were about how diabetes camp impacts their life. She said, I'll quote my 11-year-old, camp is like heaven for diabetics. As their mom, camp is almost tangible. It's the boost they need to get through the year. Camp in our house is as important as diabetes technology. That is fantastic, Shelley. Thank you so much for sharing that. Hey, it is almost time for camp, isn't it? If you haven't signed up for camp in your area, the clock is ticking. Definitely check that out. I signed Benny up the day it opens because ours fills up. And he would kill me if he misses. So yeah, diabetes camp. I agree. It's more important than diabetes technology, in my opinion. Diabetes camp is about community. It's about knowing you're not alone. It's about support. It's about learning. It is incredible for the mental stamina that people with type 1 and their families need. So if you have a Tell Me Something Good, you can drop me a line in the Facebook group. You can hit me up on email, Stacey@diabetes-connections.com. I'm also getting Instagram messages and Twitter and Facebook messages. So wherever you can find me on social media, I'm not on Pinterest. I have to tell you, Pinterest does not do it for me. I'm not a visual person. I'm a terrible arts and crafter. I'm not the best cook, and I'm not a great housekeeper. So I get depressed on Pinterest. That's not my cup of tea. But I'm everywhere else. And you can find me. Tell me your great stuff. I want to hear it. Tell me something good. Looking ahead, we have Eastern Passover coming up. So a happy holiday to everyone who celebrates. We will be traveling to my mom and dad's for just a quick visit for the Passover holiday. And then the week we come back, Benny sees his endocrinologist. And I'm very excited to bring you some information from that. I'm going to see if Benny wants to jump on and talk about it, because it'll be 6 months since we started Tresiba and Basal IQ. And I really want to give you a feel for how we're doing that and what results we've seen. Because we actually adjusted the dosage in December, I want to say, it was in January. We adjusted everything in January again. And Benny's A1C had already dropped quite a bit by January when we saw our endo last, but he made some more adjustments and we got even more aggressive, which you can really do with the Basal IQ. And, it's made a pretty significant difference. So I always like to get the official numbers and the official readings. And while I don't share exact numbers, I don't think that's fair to Benny, I do want to share our experiences with you. So hopefully we'll bring you more information about that. At the very least, I promise I will tell you what we did, how we did it, and what the results were. As for events, got one coming up in May. We actually have our local JDRF walk. We had the Charlotte walk last week. The North Charlotte walk, which is a smaller walk in my neck of the woods, is in mid-May. And then I'll be going to the Touched by Type 1 conference in Orlando. I'm really excited for this one because my parents are going to come. My mom and dad have never been to a diabetes conference before, and they don't live too far from Orlando. So they decided to come up and check it out. I'm doing a couple of presentations, so I'm a little nervous for my mom and dad to be in the crowd, but I think it'll be a good time, and I'm excited for them to see a conference and meet all the cool people that turn out for it. As always, thank you so much to my editor, to John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. He is amazing, and man, the magic he works every week, because this show is something else, right, John? Lots of moving parts. Lots of interviews, some of them done in hotel rooms with echoes and not the best microphones. So I appreciate you, John. And I appreciate you as you listen. Thank you so much. Please tell a friend about the show. Let somebody in the diabetes community know about the podcast. I'd really appreciate that. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.